This is part 2 of the story of Island Weed here on Straight Outta Gabriola.
Chief of police, ex-chief of police of somewhere in Ontario is in the pot market. In the States, I think his name's John Binary. He used to be the Speaker of the House, maybe in the Reagan years, maybe in the Bush years. Strong anti-pot advocate, Southern Republican. He's now doing webcasts on how to cash in on the cannabis industry.
Here on Gabriola, it would be so awesome if Gabriola could be known as this amazing cannabis place.
Everybody talks about, hey, there's no pot anywhere. I think there's a ton of pot everywhere. It's all these small guys that have it. So how do we get it from them into the market? Wouldn't that be awesome?
On Gabriola, people lived pretty freely and smoked pot, and everybody was happy, and there wasn't a huge enforcement issue. You couldn't flaunt it,
As we look over the past year of legalization, there's some recent perspectives from Islanders Dorothy Angst and Alan Darling. And Alan, as you may recall, was interviewed in part 1 along with his longtime friend Kevin McCollum. So at the time of putting together this part 2, we've been just over a year of legal, regulated cannabis availability. Now, you don't have to listen to part 1, which was released back in July 2019, to know all that we're going to be covering here, but it does carry some context and history to this episode. Cannabis was cultivated on this island all the way back in the 1930s, and with the influx of hippies in the 1960s and 70s, pot culture became inextricably linked to the laid-back, close-to-the-land Gulf Islands lifestyle. Now, when I was approaching people that were involved in Gabriola's weed market today and in days past, well, you can well imagine that no one really wanted to be identified. We're still in a very sensitive time in the history of legalization here. And even though I know a lot of people on the island, I've never been involved in growing cannabis. I really don't think it had anything to do with me not being on the inside of the network. And those individuals who are in this episode who did offer up their stories, well, the overwhelming consensus when I asked, what do you think, how do you think legalization has unfolded here in British Columbia, pretty much get a lot of eye rolls and variations of the expletive, what a complete shit show. So, we've got a ways to go. And here in British Columbia, at least recently, while I was putting together this show, too, in the last little while, the Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, has admitted that they've got to get this right. They've got to do better, even going as far as to say we have to capitalize on the reputation of BC Bud. Towards the end of this episode, I'll relay a few of the suggestions that Gabriolans told me about what they think needs to be done to improve the legalized cannabis market.
There were certainly people growing with commercial intent, but for myself, I'm always treated it like gardening and like tomatoes or whatever else. 4 plants, outdoors, I can grow enough for my year's needs. Well, and that's all I've done for 15 years is growing for myself. So,
I could grow 4 plants, but it's more...
It's political for you.
Yeah, for me it's political. I mean, if I bend over to that stupidity...
Yeah, later on I'll be talking with a Gabriolan who's got a lot of expertise to share about growing your legal cannabis plants. But what I like to do first is let's step back in time to the 1990s and 2000s, during the peak of BC Bud and the growers of the black market economy on Gabriola.
Before the Olympics of 2010, the USDA came up here with a small fleet of helicopters to train the RCMP in BC, and over 3 months, the training involved how to spot and confiscate pot plants, when to go in, when it's in bud, and before the growers cut it down.
That's Gabriola player, theatrical troupe member Lesley Hazeldine, reading from a transcript of an interview that I had with one of the Gabriolans involved in the black market. many people involved in the industry are still sitting in the quasi-legal, grayish, blackish market, you could call it, waiting for things to settle out. And so because of that, no one was really willing to go on the record with their voice. So I want to thank Lesley, and you'll hear from another Gabriola player, Joe Dicara, who I managed to catch down at the rehearsal for the winter pantomime that they were doing at the community hall. Okay, back in.
And in the lead up to the Olympics, the authorities announced that they would remove something like 22,000 plants at locales on southeast Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, including here. Well, my son added up the number of plants he lost, and it was something like 14,000. So he was slightly over 55% of the problem. But they still missed about 11,000 plants he still had, which was more than enough to carry his operation through the production season. They had plots tucked in all through the 707 and other forested lands on Gabriola, as well as Valdez, DeCourcy, and Ruxton Islands. They had plots and growing partners everywhere.
So following the U.S. Drug Enforcement Authority program with the RCMP, the black market industry responded by just going further indoors with lots of grow-ops.
Well, I definitely knew a number of other people who were growing, because that's how you kind of found out the opportunity. Certainly loads of other people growing that you never know about, just on small scale, like even for themselves maybe.
That's a former Gabriola grower, but I've got the voice disguised through some editing software, which always seems to come out sounding like Lance from the TV series Portlandia, the male character that Carrie Brownstein plays by having her voice altered on the show.
My street, there's somebody that grows, and you definitely smell what you're doing there. He's like, yeah, whatever, I've been doing it for 25 years, and nobody seems to say anything anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, so how does this all work? Let's break it down. Here's Joe Dicara, Gabriola player, reading a transcript from a Gabriola Grow Show operator.
A Grow Show operator on Gabriola basically went 50-50 with a select network of individuals. It was always a partnership approach. It involved the operator supplying all the lights, fans, containers to the grower, getting them set up and trained, then bringing in the plants and checking in weekly to tackle any issues, advice on watering, help with any growing issues such as smut or mildew.
When I took over a rental house that had already been set up as a growing facility, I think it had been taken down, but then I wanted to start it again. So I asked a friend to how we could go about doing that, get it set up. Yeah, he had all the lights and the timers and the fans and the pots and soil and all that. And so I basically took all that over, just set it up again. Got some instruction of how to get it going. It wasn't hard to get it going. You're tied to it daily to water it twice a day, maybe it was. Feed it with fertilizers. And so yeah, it was a labor of love. There were 2 rooms, and maybe that's typically done too. So you have one 12-hour light cycle, and so you'd have 2 rooms, and I think it was either 100 in each room or 200 in each room. It might have been 100, all packed in there pretty tight. Each room would be on 12-hour light, and then the timer was designed to flick the switch and it would flip over to the other room. So there was always a hum of current going upstairs that would always pick up. Watering, I guess it might have been once per day. And it was just simply a big garbage pail. They would had all the different fertilizers, measure it out, fill the pail with a little pump, just go in the room and put sunglasses on because it would be so bright in there. Slowly water each pot. And there wasn't really much to do in the beginning, right? It's only when the plants started getting bigger, there was a lot more work to do. It seemed like pruning lower leaves, opening it up so that the plants could get air moving around them.
I asked Lance, was he ever worried about the police?
But yeah, sure, there was definitely like an underlying stress to it. Just a, persistent sort of underlying stress. I remember like seeing every once in a while I'd see a police car drive by and, you know, go into a little minor panic that they'd come for me, sort of thing.
Then, at harvest time, the operator would come in with individuals experienced at trimming, drying, bagging, and weighing, and then transporting to market.
Of course, there weren't any full audits of how many grow shows were happening on Gabriola, but the loose estimate in the black market days has been around 24 at any one time. And getting all that product to market, a variety of creative ways were used, all very nonchalant and casual, including one story that was relayed to me by a grower who was dropping off some product to an operator who said, "Well, why don't you hop in the speedboat with me and we'll go out and do some fishing." They threw the bags of weed into the boat at the dock and quickly sped down to a private wharf near Ladysmith, where they were greeted by a Hell's Angel who gave them a kind of a fist pump. Bags were thrown onto the dock and the boat sped off. Here's Lance with a story about one of his deliveries.
Because of the contact, we could do a delivery for somebody who was trying to unload a large amount. And that involved taking one of their cars that had a trunk full of weed in it, picking that up in the village, and then driving it over to Nanaimo to this contact that we had. Driving along the lane that leads out onto the road, and just as I was coming towards the entrance, one of the police cruisers came bombing in at breakneck speed and proceeded to give me a horrible heart attack, thinking I'd made it 100 feet and got busted already. Like, fuck, really? And yeah, the cop car bombed into one of the parking spots, get out of his car and walk around the corner, probably to go in to get a coffee or something. I think after that happened, I was kind of like, okay, well, it's cool, like, not gonna get stung now, like, they're not on to me.
The Gabriola product and growers had an excellent reputation in the black market for their reliability and for their knowledge base built up over the years on plant selection, growing, and harvesting. It was probably considered the best weed to come out of BC, the gold standard of BC bud.
So it leads to the question, what kind of money was being made by your average grower?
I think I did 3. Yeah, it must have been 3 crops. I think I was getting like 10 pounds. I don't know, it's a while ago. I think maybe a pound was 15 to 1800. So yeah, it was maybe $15,000 to $18,000, something like that. Then I had to pay for the equipment. Then I think I split the first harvest with the fellow who showed me. And then the hydro was $800 a month or so. So by the end of it, a lot of work, I suppose, for the amount of money you get out of it. Because in the end, it's probably maybe something like $6,000 or...
Okay, so that's $6,000 times 3 crops in a season, so we're saying about $18,000 to $20,000 to an average kind of grow show. For another take, one longtime grower who is still actively involved told me, "No one I know of all the growers on Gabriola ever got rich. That's the higher-up operators and the angels. People here just made a living, growing weed to pay the mortgage, buy groceries, keep the old cars going. They spent their money in the local economy just like every other guy."
It's a nice fine grind, and I kind of like that. It gets really gummy in here from all the oils from the...
That's Islander Dorothy Angst, who you heard at the beginning of this episode.
But I really enjoy playing with this stuff.
She and her daughter Tiffany are the owners of Gabriola's Health and Wellness General Store, Nature Spirit Earth Market.
Yeah, always like just experimenting with different processes of how you prepare it. And,
yeah. Oh, I'm going to do this time, or whatever. It's just kind of fun to...
Dorothy, or Dot, is also well known as the Canny Gran. As the Canny Gran, Dot set up a page on the store's website to offer up recipes and tips for using cannabis. I spent a beautiful afternoon in the Canny Grant's kitchen to learn about her medicinal uses of the herb. Here she explains.
Because I got sick. Okay, so I was using occasionally, and wasn't really focused on necessarily CBD strains or anything, right? I was just doing it for enjoyment. That then then it got serious. Then it's like, I really need to understand this. Basically, I'm on 2 different pharmaceutical medications, and both of them cause me issues, you know. I didn't want to also add to that mix, you know. I didn't want to be the person with 8 pills in a container that they're taking throughout the day. For the pain management and the inflammation, you know, cannabis was the solution for me. Yeah. And it wasn't instantaneously, you know, I had to do a little bit of research, you know, and play around a lot, because and what works for me wouldn't work for you. So that's the thing with it. You know, it'll be really interesting to see where they go with the CBD. It's almost kind of like the condition I'm dealing with. With cannabis, we know that the results are there, but it's just going to be the varying doses and the strains and the hybrids and things that will work for certain people.
Are there certain strains that you would recommend right off the bat?
Well, like Dutch Treat. Had a bit of Dutch Treat for a while now, and I quite like it. It is a higher CBD strain. I have a new one that I haven't tried yet. A friend's going to come over and try it with me that is really high in CBD. It was one I actually ordered off the government website. And it was a strain that is supposed to be really good for anxiety and stress, and it's a calming strain, so it doesn't surprise me it's also high in CBD. And I think it's about 88%. So I'm really curious to get that one tried.
Right, yeah.
Have it as well that I apply to my body. So it's really a blend, you know, and the same goes with the edibles. You know, it's an assortment of different edibles. And then there are people that are great with making tinctures and so on. So a person can always do a trade.
Oh, yeah, I love that Canny Grant. You remember, it's like the Candyman. Who can take a rainbow, bada-bada-bow? Oh, the Canny Grant can.
I use a variety of different oils, so it depends, you know, what I'm going to do with that oil. But coconut oil for cookies is great, you know, and then if I want to do a vegan option, I have that ability to do so. So I kind of, you know, this is constantly evolving, keep in mind. Basically, right now, what I use a pot that I create like a double boiler in it. So I will set a jar into the water that has the coconut oil in. I'll put my herb in there that I've prepared, which I'll go into in a second.
Sure.
And then I just let that kind of simmer away in there for several hours. It gets good and dark. And then I take it off and strain it. And sometimes I'll use what I've strained for something else. It really goes through a lot of processes. So the herb is being well used by the time I'm finished with it. So basically everything that I use in my vaporizer, I can then use that herb to bake with afterwards. So it's already been used once, now I can use it again for baking, right? So, and then normally before I put it into the oil, I decarboxylate it. So what that's basically doing is boosting the effects of the THC, the CBD supposedly, but I've heard more recently that it's more for boosting the THC, so I need to do a little bit more digging into that as well. Because you kind of get mixed reports on everything out there. Everybody's got their opinion on it too, right? It's finding the actual studies and getting the right answers. Really, I think the answer for people is going to be to grow their forage plants, to take that option up, because you can kind of keep that going through the year. And the cost of it on the government website, it's expensive. It's very expensive. And so if a person is using it for medicinal reasons and they're making things, it could be very costly for them, doing ointments and so on, right? And I have to wonder how are we going to see it? Like, how are we going to see when the CBD does come out and it's launched in the pharmacies, because that's the direction they're looking at now.
Right.
So, this is another thing for me. I don't have any kind of medical coverage. Okay.
Yeah, self-employed person.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So, I was or am purchasing my cannabis, but if I can grow it, I will do that because it's going to be a lot more cost effective for me to grow it than to buy it.
My name is Naomi Beth Wakan, and I'm a poet and personal essayist. I'm not quite sure why I've been asked to read a few poems on gardening in a podcast devoted to the growing of cannabis, since I've never taken a toke in my life. Although at 88, I may well be grateful to be doing so in the not-too-distant future. So, on second thoughts, with that in mind, I offer some poems on gardening in general, and one in particular on Gabriola gardens. Bones. As God's creating, how we make our gardens into our own image, the skin of fences and hedges, the spine of a path to the front door, and limb bones of wandering tracks and trails, bark mulch, gravel, crushed seashells, whatever the island can provide. Internal organs can be fitted later, but it's the bones that allow our gardens to stir, allow our gardens to dance. Gabriola gardeners. We Gabriola gardeners may lack the Versailles touch, may be a little too laid back for a variety of reasons. Still, our gardens demand a certain respect from those city types who come to criticize and stay to admire our spiritual labyrinths, our meditation groves, our wabi-sabi use of sandstone and driftwood, the touches only islanders can give to shallow soil, water-scarce plots of hopefulness. There you go.
I think you've done this a few times before. Oh yeah, thanks, Naomi. And that's our segue. It's time to take a little trip into the garden and find out more about growing the 4 cannabis plants you are now allowed legally to cultivate.
Make your own compost, make a good rich soil. Banana peels bring potassium, manure is nitrogen. You just figure it out. Bone meal is the phosphorus. So make a good rich mix, and you don't have to worry about it. You can put like nettle tea or whatever you have along the way just to give it some minerals or something. And if you go online, there's a lot of good recipes that are like the ideal combination, like alfalfa meal, bone meal, blood meal, kelp.
There's Shaun, island horticulturalist. There is a deep pool of expertise and know-how on Gabriola when it comes to growing weed. He's had quite a bit of experience over the years. Here's my interview with him.
But if you do that, then everything, you have less likelihood of like just disease and weak plants and, bugs, and why not? And you'll also have not potency is generally genetic, but it can affect a little bit. But certainly like smell and flavor will be better. Right, so you want a good, resilient, strong, healthy, high-yield, good-smelling plant, nurture it. If you're going to consider growing, the very first thing you have to decide is if you're going to grow indoor or outdoor, because it's an option with that particular type of plant. If you go the indoor route, the benefit is that you can have a continuous harvest. So if you don't have a backyard, if you don't have a balcony, if you don't have a way to grow outdoor but you want weed, then you might consider the indoor approach. The downside is there's a lot of knowledge to learn. There's a lot of equipment you got to buy. You got to dedicate a space to it. Right. It's a system. Systems fail. Systems, That's a whole, that's your very first decision. Am I going to become an indoor, or do I want to kind of just do the outdoor thing? The outdoor thing is you have to wait till the spring to plant your plants. So I personally feel like there's the ecological aspect of the indoor where you're multiplying by millions of people now who want to have their little grow ops. That's millions of ballasts, lights, fans, timers, ends up in the landfill.
Yeah.
But I can see that for some people, that's probably the route they have to take. Yeah. So they got to do a DIY or buy a kit. Yeah. That's a big commitment.
And of course, we're only talking about our 4 legal plants.
Yeah.
we're supposed to be having.
Yeah.
So do you want to take it then from the standpoint of an outdoor situation?
That's what I thought.
Okay, and so let's look at that. Call it your, 4 Jamaican tomato plants.
Okay. That's right.
And walk me through.
Yeah, okay. So, again, you're going to start off with, are you buying seeds?
Yeah.
Are you buying what people call clones? I don't think scientific is actually clones, or cuttings.
Yeah.
The value of a cutting is that you know exactly what it's, you can ask the person, what did it look like? When was it ready? What's the yield? What's the strength? And it's a female. Because when you grow pot, you want the female. So you don't want the male and the female. The female produces the fruit, and the fruit is what has the cannabinoids that you want to get high on. So there are seeds now that are feminized. A lot of them are.
Right.
So they're kind of guaranteed to be female. Let's say you're buying seeds, because a cutting's not, I don't know that you can legally.
Right, I don't
It's probably
think so.
a kind of word of mouth thing where you have to know someone who knows someone.
Yeah.
So let's assume you go down to the local nursery, or you order them online, and you've got your seeds. Now you have to germinate them. Get a paper towel, dampen it. Probably don't pick like a brown paper towel, because it doesn't have bleach in it. Put it in a dark space, keep it moist for 4 or 5 days. It sprouts. Take that sprout and put it in your medium, probably like a little peat pellet or your little 4-inch pot, just like you would something else.
Right.
And now you're kind of starting off. Anyone who has any experience gardening, the same kind of knowledge applies.
Right.
So it's the same, we talked about this the other day, like rich soil. What makes a rich soil? If you don't want to add fertilizer, the only way around not adding fertilizer is having a rich soil medium. Right, so
it all starts with the soil.
It all starts with the soil.
Exactly.
And this plant, cannabis, is very similar to tomato plants.
Right. Okay.
It suffers from the same diseases, potentially powdery mildew, spider mites, that kind of thing. It has trichomes, which I don't know if we'll get into that, but trichomes are like the little, what people call the hair on marijuana, on cannabis. And when they turn amber, like at 75-80% of them at the end, that's when you know your fruit is ready. The trichomes are what produce the cannabinoids and the terpenes. That's like your flavor profile and your potency profile. But, a lot of plants have them doing different functions. It might be to keep insects out, might be to whatever.
Yeah.
But tomatoes also have trichomes. They have the same they need the same kind of soil mix. They're like really rich, well-drained soil. So does cannabis.
What about sunlight in that situation? Tomatoes pretty demanding. Is cannabis
very
too?
similar.
Yeah,
you want a good 8 hours, almost like minimum 8 hours direct sunlight. So try to orient it to the sun. There's 2 kinds of there's many kinds of cannabis, but there's some that go by photoperiod and some that are genetically. They go into flower just on a time period. It doesn't matter when you plant them. The other strain is by photoperiod, which is why you can grow it indoor. You can trick the plant. If there's more than 12 hours of dark, it triggers it into its flowering stage. So that's something to know when you buy your plants, because the one that goes the 12-hour, like the photoperiod one, is a lot bigger, but it takes longer. It won't be ready till, probably October. The other ones will be smaller, but ready earlier. So if you're going, if you want a higher yield, you want to get enough, you're a regular consumer, and you want, get the later, bigger strain, not like the tiny little thing that, finishes in August but weighs half an ounce.
So it comes to harvest time at the end of August or in the fall, early September. Do the same principles apply like for herbs as far as drying them and getting them ready?
Yes,
is it pretty well the same in trimming and all of that?
The typical ones around here, around mid-September, you're going to see that they've already got a lot of flowering. They have those trichomes that will look like white hair on the nodes are getting closer, the stems aren't as long. There's little budlets forming everywhere. When those trichomes, about 75% or so, turn amber colored, you know that the fruit is ready. Just cut it into 2 or 3 foot length branches, hang it upside down, get a little fan. Maybe the fan's not on the plants, but it's in the room circulating the air.
Right.
Keep it slightly dark, but dry. Maybe a little heater in there. Wait till the stems can snap. Then you know it's dry enough. It's not going to mold if you put it away. most people trim it at that point. I mean, they take off the largest leaves, even the second largest, and people go down the third largest, and they leave just the fruit.
Right.
And you put it in as airtight a container as possible, because the oxygen's what kind of depletes the nice smell and everything. So, if you can keep it, it's airtight. There are growers who feel you should actually keep the larger leaves on until the moment you decide to smoke it, because it keeps everything in. All those little trichomes, everything's falling out of it. The more you handle it and you've taken them all away, you could also just literally dry the plant, put it aside, and as you want something, take it out and trim away the bigger leaves down to the more tasty, flavorful stuff.
Let's pop back over to the Canny Grand's kitchen. Here's Dot. Let's talk about your just recommends or favorite recipes, or have you?
You know what? I have this old Betty Crocker cookie recipe that I've been using for years, and all I do is take that base recipe and then make changes to it.
Yeah.
So basically what I do, once I've made my coconut oil or my butter or whatever it may be that a person's working with, I just use that to replace that ingredient in the recipe when I'm baking. The downside is I never know what the potency is going to necessarily be like. And I've heard that you can get some, in-home testing kits. I don't know how accurate they are. I need to check into that. Mm-hmm. But it would be really neat if I could check the dosing, on my cookies. Just for myself. I know what a good dose is for me. So it would be kind of neat to do that. And I did have an experience.
You said it was the old Betty Crocker recipes. Was Betty Crocker actually recommending a little bit of?
No. This is you never know.
Yeah, you never know. But no, just the old tried and trues.
Yeah, the old tried and true.
Weaving in It is a music track called Sunrise Over Malaspina by recording artist Segway. It's on the Silent Season music label based out of the Comox Valley, which is a studio heavily influenced by the natural surroundings of Canada's west coast. There's a Gabriola connection in there too, with the head creative folks. Check it out. I posted a link on the notes for this episode. For this island, for the climate we're in, if you're growing outdoors with using your proper gardening practices, have you got your favorites? Have you got ones that you would say, this is what I always go to for yield, for flavor, for reliability, resilience?
Yeah, there's a lot of they're kind of like the strains that I access are through networks that are still semi-legal, artisanal, or what do you do, craft growers. The industry is new in terms of there's lots of fly-by-nighters. You can't really, I personally rely on, I've seen the plants, time warp.
Yeah.
And
this comes up a lot.
The Merville mortgage buster, because it's a big yielder. The earlier the strain, the better. Something like Afghanistan, Northern Lights, I think, is something that's very common. A lot of the strains that I'm talking about have that in it,
right?
Which is what makes it reliable. There's a whole bunch of strains like that if you ask around on the island, you'll find somebody who's actually grown something, probably has their own seeds, and may even have a couple of cuttings for you to get you started.
Getting to some summary thoughts now on the continuing story of island weed.
Normalization is still going to take another 10 years.
How many years have people been told what a bad thing this is? How long has that gone on?
Yeah.
So how long is it going to take for us to take away that,
bring it into the light, right? And that's what I think a lot of people hold out hope for legalization all across Canada, is that it brings the discussion out everywhere, and in a way that people are going to go, well, let's have do more scientific studies that aren't underground. To add to that, Because we know all the harm that legal drugs such as alcohol and pharmaceuticals can so easily inflict on individuals and families, well, cannabis is no different in that it can be abused and cause harm. No one here is ever denied that who I spoke with. And if there was one good outcome of legalization thus far, it is that it's finally bringing the science and education components into the mainstream of society to talk about. When I could get them to finally stop swearing and venting their anger about how incredibly frustrating it is that BC, of all the provinces, had screwed up legalization so badly. Here were some of the top suggestions I commonly heard from those Gabriolans who have had the insight and depth of experience in the cannabis marketplace. Number one, get the government out of centralized warehousing and control. Get the liquor distribution branch out of the business of handling all cannabis. It's a crazy, inefficient way, and it makes for inferior product quality because of the way that they store it. Allow growers to distribute directly to the retail shops and via a farm gate sales kind of permitting process. This promotes locavore, buying local, shopping local, small market craft growers, similar to the microbreweries and the small-scale distillers that are all over British Columbia.
I hope that that's what we'll see happen. We've got the people that are, really good at growing.
Supplying locally grown organic product and specialty heritage strains. That's what a lot of the people in Gabriola talked about. Right now, everything is geared to serve the big corporate giants, all in indoor monster hydroponic facilities. It squeezes out the small operator. Number two, allow and promote the co-op business model for producers and consumers. Cannabis is essentially an agricultural product, and the feeling is let's regulate it and treat it as such. Number three, the red tape to start up a retail shop or a growing business and get a license is the worst bureaucratic nightmare, something out of the Politburo in the former USSR. Everyone wants to see the licensing process more streamlined, similar to liquor licensing, and to have government help center resources so that the applicants can navigate all their requirements a little more effectively.
They do it with alcohol, so, okay, let's open up that cottage right here. And don't waste time, it's taken this long to get this far, let's kind of shorten this all up and make it happen.
In so many ways, the story of Island Weed has parallels to the history of malt whiskey in Scotland. For it was when England and Scotland became Great Britain in the early 1700s that the Crown brought in regulations and a malt tax in an effort to legalize the making of Scotch whiskey. While in fighting the tax, many Highland distillers continued to operate illegally, and the Highland distillers always sold for a lower price, and their quality was considered much better. There's an episode of CBC's Ideas back in 1996 that Paul Kennedy hosted called Whiskey, the Water of Life. And you should have a listen to that because it's uncanny the parallels that are there between Scotch whiskey and cannabis in British Columbia. Robbie Burns, the Scottish bard's famous proclamation, "Freedom and whiskey gang together," could easily be replaced by "Freedom and weed gang together." Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Ken Gurr. Now, if you want to stay tuned, at the very end of this episode, I have an audio footnote that pertains to Part 1. We have lots more stories to come here on Straight Outta Gabriola. Bye for now.
It's lovely, the train comes around and we've lived to see it legalized. Didn't really think that would happen in my time. Really surprised.
Okay, here's the footnote. It pertains to the story of Island Weed Part 1. If you recall, I was falling down the old rabbit hole with David Beam and others trying to find out if there was a strain of cannabis that was developed that was named after a Gabriola place name or Gabriola itself. Well, when I was Googling and doing research for this Part 2, I tripped across Broken Coast Cannabis, a fairly large legal cannabis company that's operated with its headquarters in Duncan. And sources tell me that a couple of Gabriolans are involved fairly heavily in the ownership group there. Well, they named some of the most popular bud offerings out of that company after the Gulf Islands. So there is indeed a flower that you can buy and order online at Broken Coast that is called Gabriola. On some sites, it was the 2019 finalist for the top hybrid flower, with hundreds of very positive reviews from consumers, with over 95% saying that they would buy it again. It was very positively rated. And here's an excerpt from one reviewer I found on a source called Canna Connection. It's a blog. Frost on top of frost on top of frost, and a vibrant rainbow of every color you've ever seen in cannabis. I was lucky enough to first try this at over 20% THC, and I was blown away by every aspect. We talk a lot about terpene, content, and quality, and I genuinely feel a remarkable difference in effect when I smoke a flower like this that's literally drenched in them, regardless of its THC content. So Gabriola for me was the smoothest rocket ship to the moon I've ever taken. Flavor profile is spicy cinnamon, a spoonful of vanilla ice cream with berry on the exhale. Very cerebral and submerging high with not a hint of anxiety, paranoia, or pressure. Was that a variety that originated on Gabriola? I don't know. Try and email Broken Coast and see if you can find out for me.